Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. Yes, it's another early Arsecast. That's what happens when there's midweek football. It wasn't quite Champions League last night, but Arsenal had an EFL Cup tie against Premier League opposition, coming out 1-0 winners over Brentford at the, whatever their stadium is called, I can't remember what it's called. The G-Spot Stadium. That's it, right? G-Tech. I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Arsenal found the G-spot in terms of the result, if not always the performance, and there were some talking points, of course. Aaron Ramsdale returned in goal. Emile Smith Rowe started a game at last. Reiss Nelson, there was a debut for a Hale End Academy graduate. There were some changes in the back four. For the very first time, we saw Takahiro Tomiyasu start at centre-back for Arsenal, which is a bit unusual because that's where he plays his international football for Japan. At Arsenal, he's played at right-back, he's played at left-back, but has never started a game at centre-half, and actually I thought he was really, really good. For me, the man of the match. Lots of block shots and clearances, but he gave there was a presence to him at centre-half that I think was very important in terms of last night's performance, particularly in the second half when Brentford came back into the game and there were lots of crosses and long throws and everything else. All in all, though, I think there's plenty to discuss about this game and about this tournament as well. So with me to do that from the Telegraph, it's Sam Dean. Hi, Sam.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. You were there last night to see Arsenal beat Brentford 1-0. I saw people describe this sort of as like an Arsenal B team, which I think is a little bit unfair. But it was a very, very much a changed Arsenal team. It needed to be because of the injuries, but it also needed to be because of the competition. And we might get into a few of the individual performances. Was there any major surprise in terms of the team lineup for you beyond the debut for 19-year-old Charles Sago Jr.?
Yeah, that was definitely the main surprise. Beyond that, I think it was largely what people were expecting. I think actually the bigger surprise and for me, the bigger concern from Arsenal's perspective was how strong Brentford had gone. They very much played their first team apart from maybe just Matthias Jensen. So when I saw those team sheets an hour before kickoff, I did fear a bit for Arsenal, just given the amount of changes that Arteta had made and how few Brentford had made. But I think generally, I think those who would have seen the game would agree that the first half Arsenal were largely dominant and could have maybe scored a couple more. And then in the second half, it got a bit ropey, but fundamentally, they never looked in a huge amount of danger, apart from a couple of really very good saves from Aaron Ramsdale, who I'm sure we'll talk about. But no, in terms of team selection, I guess I thought maybe Eddie Nketiah would get a break of some sort because he's been playing so many minutes and he sort of played so aggressively and intensively against Spurs at the weekend. But I guess they simply haven't got that many options right now and almost had no choice but to play him. Yeah, I mean, the other option, I suppose, might have been Kai Havertz to start up front, but when you don't have Fabio Vieira, and we'll talk about injuries, I guess, in a few minutes' time, it does give you, or does give a manager a decision to make, and I think Eddie was actually pretty good, compared to the North London Derby performance where the touch wasn't quite right, he didn't hold it up quite as well. He did very well, I thought, in the centre-forward position. And you mentioned the first half where Arsenal were on top. They started brightly. You can often get a good picture of what Arsenal are going to do in a game by the first few minutes, and I think very quickly they exerted themselves. There was one moment maybe where I think Jorginho got caught in the ball, but beyond that there wasn't much from a Brentford perspective, and Arsenal got on top very quickly, capitalised on a mistake at the back and went ahead through Reiss Nelson. Yeah, it was a nice finish, I thought, from Nelson, because it was one of those that came to him with all these bodies flying around everywhere. I think Nathan Collins had just slid in, and it was one of those where you have to keep your cool when everyone else is going mad, and he did just that. The one thing I would say just on the team selection in those first few minutes was, and we'd seen this a little bit in the warm-up, but you can't always be sure, was that Ben White playing right back and Tomiyasu playing centre-back. I think that maybe is not what people were expecting when they saw the team sheet, because to my mind, at least, I don't think Tomiyasu had ever played centre-back before for Arsenal. So that was new, and that was certainly unexpected just based on the names on the team sheet. But I'm sure we'll come on to talk about Tomiyasu as well. But yeah, I thought that first sort of half an hour from Arsenal was was good without being spectacular, and a few nice moments. I think Smith Rowe had that lovely run, which really did provide a nice reminder of what he can offer to the team, and almost got a second goal, which probably would have killed the occasion completely before Brentford came back in the second half. But generally, I don't think Arteta was overly enamoured with the performance. There was quite a lot of sort of head in hands on the touchline and rocking back. He's so demonstrative on the touchline, and sometimes when you're in the press box right behind him, which is the case at Brentford, you find yourself instantly looking towards him anytime something goes wrong, just to see how he reacts. And he doesn't hide it. If someone plays the wrong pass at the wrong time, you can see on his face how annoyed he is. And he was annoyed for quite a lot of that first half, but still, there was never really any threat from Brentford, and I thought the defence did very well sort of throughout the game.
Do you think that, is that as much down to Mikel Arteta's character as the performance itself? Because, it was tidy from Arsenal. We did dominate the game. There was 65% possession, maybe not quite enough in terms of end product, but like you say, this is Brentford's first team, and you've got players like Smith Rowe starting his first game since May 2022, Reiss Nelson starting a game, a debutant on the right wing, Jorginho, doesn't start a great deal in there as well. And despite that, there was some tidy play from Arsenal. Maybe didn't quite make enough of that domination of possession. So, I don't think we did too much wrong in that first half. But you're saying Arteta is sort of, I know what he's like. We've all seen him. But is that more about what he expects or demands rather than what is actually transpiring on the pitch? Because there's always things that players can do better. Players make bad decisions and so on. But it might just be him to an extent that this is like, I need my players to sort of transcend being pretty good to I want them to be very, very good.
Yeah, it's definitely him. And also the one thing I would say, and I kind of say this to everyone whenever I get the chance, which is that us in the media and fans, we know football and we love football, but we do not understand it at the same depth that Mikel Arteta does and his coaching staff does. And when you watch him quite closely during a game, you can see, for example, last night, about 25 minutes in, half an hour in, he went mad at Ben White for something. And I was watching this game thinking, what has Ben White done wrong here? And I could not tell you. It simply could not tell you. It's something to do with his positioning, I guess, or the pass he'd played at the wrong time, at the wrong moment to the wrong player, or whatever. But Arteta went mad at him. He was sort of throwing both his hands up, screaming at him across the pitch, like really sort of demonstrably furious with him for like 5 minutes. And White was sort of looked back like quite sheepishly, kind of unsure of what to say, what to do. I remember thinking that last night, just like, I just don't understand what has happened there, and I never will, because I'm not in that depth of knowledge. So I do think sometimes we watch games and think, oh yeah, he did well. But then actually something Arteta will have seen in a positioning or a moment will actually have really annoyed him and infuriated him. And sometimes the way he reacts on the touchline is a good indication of that. And I reckon a lot of fans who sit behind him at the Emirates, because obviously there's so many in that section of the ground, I reckon a lot of them will probably agree with what I'm saying, that they see things and reactions from him to stuff that you just you watch, you're like, what's he seeing here? But that's football at the highest level for you, and we are not tacticians of the highest class.
No. I mean, we all understand the game to an extent, I guess, but it's the instructions and the detail of those instructions and the game plan. Like I was watching, even on TV, you wouldn't have seen this obviously because you were at the game, but one of the Brentford players is getting ready to come on, and he's handed a sheet, with 4 or 5 diagrams on. He's looking at those diagrams, and I'm just thinking, what's on those really? Like what does he need to see on there that can't be explained to him or whatever it is? So yeah, managers, they have a bit more depth on this stuff than we do.
Yeah, a good example, and I appreciate I'm probably rambling here, so I'll be quick. But at Brighton, Roberto De Zerbi basically sets his team up to build up play in 3 different ways, like A, B, and C. And if A doesn't work, they've got to switch to B, and if B doesn't work, they switch to C. But I think most people watching those games would not be able to tell you when A, B, or C are being deployed. But for each of those players, all 10 outfielders and the goalkeeper, they're changing every single part of their movement, and they're running for those patterns. So like the level of depth at the modern game now, certainly with coaches like Arteta and De Zerbi and Guardiola, the level of depth and sort of tactical understanding is just beyond the comprehension of mere mortals.
Sure. So look, it was 1-0 at half-time and then it changed. I mean, what do you put the difference in the two halves down to? Was it just a case that, look, this is a cup tie, Brentford are at home, they probably got a bit of a rocket at half-time, They got a foothold in the game, and then the trajectory, momentums of games can shift, as we know. But they really did have if you want to call it a storming second half, you could certainly do that. 15 attempts on goal, some very resolute Arsenal defending at times, lots of blocks, lots of clearances. But the game shifted, the game tilted, and maybe that's part and parcel of just cup football, I have to say, because it's, I guess in some ways, a low-stakes encounter, the EFL Cup. I found it actually pretty enjoyable. I know some people will have watched this game and thought, I don't like this. Brentford are two on top. We're, skirting around danger all the time, these long throws, these crosses. When Jakub Kiwior has to save a goal with his arse, maybe things aren't going as well as you would like. But the flip side of that is that defending as much as attacking is a really fundamental part of the game. And if you can do that well, then I think you deserve perhaps some credit for it, even if you could make the case that, look, maybe we should have been a bit more on it in the opposition half.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know what you think, but while there was quite a lot of pressure, and I think that Kiwior block was really good chance. And then there was the Ramsdale save onto the post from Visser. But I never really felt like Brentford were creating loads. It felt more like pressure and sustained pressure. I think they went a bit more direct with their passing. You mentioned the long throws, and they sort of got in Arsenal's faces a bit more. I never really felt like Arsenal were going to be overwhelmed. And I agree on the defending point. And it's something that's sort of been a feature of Arteta's time as manager, that Arsenal have always been quite good and weirdly good at kind of parking the bus in that sense. Not in the sense of the full game, but like when they sit deep and defend in a block, they're very good at doing so. And obviously that was fundamental to Arsenal winning the FA Cup in Arteta's first year. And whenever they've had to do that, you think back to the sort of Rob Holding 5-3-2 system, and the Wolves away a couple of years ago and Villa away a couple of years ago. When they've done that, they've generally held on and they've not sort of crumbled in that way. So I think that's something that, whether they work on that hugely on the training ground, I don't know. I don't think they do, to be honest. But it's something that they've got in the bank. And I think the fact that the team that Arteta's built is full of big lads who know how to challenge in the air and to compete physically and win the duels, as he would say, is relevant to that. I mean, that back four last night of White, Tomiyasu, Gabriel, Kiwior, they're all 6 foot plus.
Yeah.
And if you want to hurl the ball into the box all half, they're fine with that. They're probably going to head them all the way. So Arsenal are well suited to cope with that, certainly more than they had been in previous years, famously, before Arteta.
I mean, the substitutions of Mikel Arteta are constantly under the microscope. It's coming up on 4 years now since he took the job. In some ways, it feels like it's flown by in an instant. In others, not so much. But one of the recurring themes, or one of the recurring points of discussion, has been substitutions and how effective those substitutions are. Last night, he saw that Arsenal were under pressure. He took off Ben White, took off Sego Jr., put on Gabriel Jesus and Alexander Zinchenko, shuffled everything around. Everyone came across one in terms of the back four. Tomiyasu went to right back. Kiwior went into the middle. Zinchenko at left back. And it worked. I think it worked in terms of stemming the relentlessness of the Brentford pressure during that period where, like you say, it did feel like it was sort of coming these waves of pressure more than real threat. And I think that had an impact on how Arsenal were then able to control the game. Pretty soon after, actually, the two substitutions, there was a great chance for Reiss Nelson, set up by Kai Havertz, but his shot, went just wide 2-0. I think would have won that game, no problem.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I wonder what you thought watching it on TV, but I thought the game was crying out for those subs about 10 minutes earlier. Yeah. I felt like Arteta moved a little bit late on that. I was sitting there watching it thinking, you've got to get one of these guys on, like Jesus or Zinchenko or Odegaard, just to kind of calm it down.
Particularly,
waited.
Yeah, particularly for the young guy, for Sego Jr., who I think, he was tidy, he didn't do anything wrong, but it just looked like the game was passing him by a little bit. That was the change I thought he maybe should have made a bit quicker.
Yeah, that was the one I thought. And I agree that he did look tidy, and there was a couple of nice moments in the first half where he sort of beat his man. But he wasn't in the game. He wasn't feeling the game, I don't think, in that second half. It was sort of going past him, as you say. Arsenal held on and once, as you say, I totally agree. Once they made those subs, the flow of it did sort of change a bit. And certainly when Odegaard and Elneny came on last 10 minutes, it started to feel like if anyone was going to score now, it was going to be Arsenal on the break. But yeah, no, I think overall he'll be happy with his substitutions, Arteta, which probably isn't the case from Sunday's derby.
Yeah, maybe not. But, they're not going to work in every game. That is just, that's the nature of football as well.
Yeah.
As a place to go, Brentford can be pretty tricky. Like you said, they put out basically their first team. Some of the big players, and Bumo was pretty quiet, all things considered, considering, what a threat he is. And Wissa had lots of shots, of course, maybe didn't make the right decisions in certain areas. But, to go there and to do it with this rotated team, obviously important for Mikel Arteta in the context of what he continues to say what he wants to do this season with this squad. So, well, I'm sure in the analysis and in the heat of the moment, there'll be things that he didn't really like or didn't enjoy and threw his arms up at. How do you think he'll react to this one overall? Because this need, which is pressing now, if there are 7 injuries, like he said afterwards, if there are 7 injuries, this need to use his squad to the fullest extent is obvious. But it's not really something that he's always been particularly strong at. It might be in part because he hasn't always had a squad that strong. But last night, he brought in Ramsdale again, brought in Tomiyasu, brought in Kivior, brought in Smith Rowe, brought in Jorginho, brought in Reiss Nelson. And I think all of them played well. Some a little bit better than others, but all of them played well. I mean, we can talk a little bit more about the importance of this competition in terms of the trophy, but in terms of maybe giving Mikel Arteta belief in some of the players that he can use, will this have been a very useful exercise beyond that win?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly for the back four and the defenders who came in, I think, for example, seeing Tomiyasu at centre back will be really instructive and useful for Arteta to know that he's tried that now and it worked quite well. That is a good option to have, especially if other players have potentially got injuries, and obviously we know Timber's out for a long time. And someone like Reiss Nelson too, I thought defensively, especially, Nelson was really impressive last night. I think he cut off quite a few counter-attacks and worked really hard. And that kind of positional discipline has always been something that people have questioned with Nelson. He answered those questions quite well last night, I thought. What I would say is I agree that everyone sort of played well. I don't think Arteta will be overly impressed by the sort of the team collective dynamic. And the level of control that they usually have wasn't there. And talk about those sustained pressure from Brentford in the second half and those waves of attacks. That's what Arsenal want to be doing. And they want to be up the other end of the pitch, keeping the ball in that sort of horseshoe formation around the penalty box and pinning Brentford back. And they weren't able to do that, which I think will probably be something that plays in Arteta's mind if he thinks about this team as a collective. But fundamentally, in big games, this team as a collective is never going to play together, is it? There's going to be a few other more regular players. So it was more a case of individuals getting some action on the pitch, getting some minutes which they need and some freshness. And someone like Smith Rowe, for example, playing 82 minutes, starting his first game since, as you say, almost 500 days. That's really valuable, and he can come on now against Bournemouth or even start against Bournemouth, depending on what Arteta wants to do, and be a bit more fresh and have that sort of rhythm built up. Whereas if this tournament ended last night and Arsenal had lost, those players would never got that rhythm again. I think they would have been sort of waiting for their chances, and especially with Europa League with Arsenal being a Champions League rather than the Europa League this season.
I mean, let's talk about some of the individuals. Smith Rowe, I think, is the key one, obviously, because he's been out for so long and he was there last season, but not used. So I know he had this injury and surgery and all the rest of it, but there was also a long period in last season where he was just on the bench. He didn't get on, got a couple of scant minutes towards the end of the season, and that was it. And there was a lot of speculation during the summer. I think you asked him, did you, about there ever being a consideration to letting him go? And he played that down pretty seriously. But, the proof of the pudding, et cetera, it's easy to say things, but how you use players and when you use players gives you a good indication. Nevertheless, we saw in that he started in the Odegaard position, there are differences between him and Martin Odegaard, right? he's a bit more, I think Arteta described him as vertical. So he likes to get the ball and give and go, and there were some 1-2s that maybe didn't quite come off. Maybe that sharpness isn't quite there yet. The chance that he had late in the second half was a lovely little run and a shot with his left foot, maybe a few more games under his belt, and there's a bit more conviction in that finish. But, I mean, it's great for Smith Rowe. He's a really popular player with the fans. But is this, when Mikel Arteta talks about tactical variation and being able to do different things, is this sort of Smith Rowe-Odegaard dynamic quite an interesting one in that regard? Because we know what Odegaard gives the team, but Smith Rowe in that position gives it something different. Not like wildly different, but certainly a player who is able to burst through the lines. And when Arsenal are about to, or in a season already where we've seen teams who come and sit and play in a deep block, having those different keys to unlock those defences might be very, very useful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you mentioned that chance and that run that he produced last night, and that is the one thing I think that Smith Rowe offers this midfield that no one else does. That ability to take the ball on the half turn and just go through gaps and drive past people. And that was obviously so fundamental to his success in the team a couple of years ago. It's maybe a slightly sort of minor point, but I was a bit disappointed that he played on the right of the midfield three, because that is Odegaard's position. And I don't think anybody is expecting Smith Rowe to force his way into the team ahead of Martin Odegaard. So I was quite hoping to see him in the left, because obviously Havertz and Vieira have been sharing that role for much of the season. And that seems to me, I mean, if I was Emile Smith Rowe, I would look at that left 8 as the position in which I could break into the squad, break into the team, because frankly, no one's going to displace Odegaard. I don't think Arsenal, there's no one in world football who Arsenal would displace Odegaard with right now. Mm-hmm. So the gap is on the left, and that's the slot that he needs to fill. So him playing 82 minutes on the right was almost, for me, a minor disappointment, because we know that Odegaard's going to be the guy there. But I mean, I thought he played well without really stamping his authority on the second half. I think by the end he had a bit of a knock and was limping a bit, but that happens when you've not played for that long and not started a game for that long, sorry. But yeah, I mean, what will be interesting is if the Havertz experiment continues to sort of have mixed results, and obviously you guys on the podcast and everyone in the Arsenal sort of fan base has been talking a lot about Havertz in the last couple of months. And if results turn, my view is that is going to be the big sort of talking point among supporters and the media, that why isn't Smith Rowe playing over Havertz? And I see that as Smith Rowe's best chance to get into the team, to play on that left 8 side. And I'm hoping for his sake that last night was a good step in that regard. I think it was a step forward. But I would still be surprised if he started against Bournemouth on Saturday. Oh, sure. I don't think he will, but I think, maybe last night was more about getting him minutes. And I think you're right that the position that's up for grabs, if you like, or the one where there's a bit more competition, or should be more competition, is that left 8 position, because the Havertz conversation is kind of impossible not to have. It's died down a little bit, but it's one of those where after 3 games of the season, Mikel Arteta was like calling for fans to be understanding and to show love to the player, because when you do that, you get more out of them, etc., which I think tells you something in itself. I think his words were, well placed, because we have had situations like that before. I mean, what did you make of Havertz last night? I thought, from an attacking perspective, he did make that chance for Reiss Nelson. There was one moment where he might have had a shot and it was a bit tame. He got onto his right foot rather than his left. But in terms of his contribution, particularly in the second half, I think he had, where are the stats here? I did have them here on the blog. I think he made 5 tackles and 5 clearances, 4 tackles, 5 clearances, something like that. So he did certainly do his defensive duties. His height was useful at times in the box. He got a few crosses and corners away. But obviously, when you pay that much money for a player, you want his contribution to be more notable up the other end of the pitch. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ever since Arsenal made their move for Havertz, I was sort of broadly supportive of it. I thought it made sense, and I still think it makes sense. I still think it will make sense, but I can't. And it sounds so like British football fan Brexit Britain kind of thing, and it's completely nonsense. And I'm sure somebody like Arteta would think I'm an idiot for saying it, but like, I just can't shake the feeling that I kind of want him to whack the ball and kick someone a bit. Like, he feels so timid. Like, I mean, obviously that's ludicrous, but like, I don't know if you've seen Dominic Szoboszlai's goal for Liverpool last night.
Not yet.
When he got the ball on the edge of the box and just smashed it. I kind of want Havertz to do that. Like, even if it's just like smash a 50-yard pass across the pitch, and like, there's a lack of aggression and sort of like physical, sort of not nastiness, but like physical heft. And like, it's all very delicate and soft. And even last night, it felt like when he was playing a 10-yard pass, he wasn't pinging it into someone's foot. He was sort of rolling it to them. And it all, which obviously is completely perception based and not rooted in any sort of footballing reality. But I wonder if that's kind of counting against him a bit with some fans. And he looks a bit lightweight, which is odd because he's 6'4" and he's got, he's got this frame, but he doesn't seem to use it. And I kind of just want to see him run in and do a sliding tackle by the corner flag and then roar at the crowd like sort of Steven Gerrard 2009, even though it doesn't mean anything for the team. Which I'm sure that Arteta and his coaching staffs would think that's ludicrous. But that's I kind of find myself just desperately urging Havertz to do something more gritty and dirty and aggressive and strong. But yeah, on his performance last night, I thought it was tidy without having a huge amount of conviction. There was a chance in the first half when the ball came across to him on the left side of the box, and he took a touch and came inside, and the shot was blocked with his weaker foot. And I just thought at no point in that move when the ball fell to him did I think, he's going to take a touch and laser this into the top corner, which is kind of a reflection, I guess, of his lack of confidence at the moment. But I genuinely think he'll come good. And I thought the signs in pre-season, you were out there, you saw as well when he got those 2 goals in 3 games, sort of both from crosses from the right wing, and the way he's pushing into the box and the chances he's had and missed in the league so far this season. I really do think it will click at one point, but I didn't see last night as a hugely promising step forward in terms of his sort of attacking output, to be honest.
He needs a moment, I think. I think he just needs a moment for himself. Again, this is just perception. I don't know if this is true one way or the other, but he strikes me as a guy who's maybe a bit low on self-confidence and, understands that the some of the public sentiment towards him is not particularly positive. And I think that's kind of hard. It's a sort of baggage to take with you onto the pitch every single time you go on, and you're desperate to do something and desperate to make a contribution. Maybe that desperation should manifest itself in one of those sliding tackles in the corner flag. We'll see. It might just be something as simple as that sort of gets people behind you a bit. Look, we all want more, and I'm not saying he just needs to clean somebody out to win people over, because if you have a price tag like that, you've got to do a bit more. But it just feels like a moment could change things for him.
Do you know what? This is going to sound very odd, but and the most worrying thing in my mind, and as I say, I do believe this will work in the long term. But he kind of reminds me of me in the sense that I'm a middle class guy who's sort of had a very nice upbringing, and I've not got this aggression deep wired into my brain. I look at him and think the way he's moving and looking, with all the fans kind of against him, it's probably how I would, like a bit introspective, a bit unsure of myself, a bit sort of tentative. Then look at someone like Gabriel Jesus and think that guy is a different human to me. Like the way he plays, the aggression, the level of intensity at all times, and this sort of like fighting spirit, which I don't know where that comes from. Maybe that's from Brazil, from his upbringing, or just who he is as a person, like that competitive, visible, like visceral competitive attitude, which you can see and you can feel and you can smell. Havertz doesn't have that. He just seems like a really nice lad, which is great. And I'm sure I'm sure what I'm talking about is complete nonsense because I don't know Havertz personally. But I look at him and think I don't see the street fighter that I see in other players. Not that you need it, but that is something I think that has an impact on his perception from the fans.
Yeah, I think it's look, the whole running around a bit vibe, it can get people on board. I'm not saying that that's all a footballer should do, because like everyone can run around a bit to varying degrees of stamina and pace. But I hope it starts to happen for him. I really do, because the longer it goes on, obviously the more conversations people have about it. Another conversation that doesn't seem to go away is the Raya Ramsdale one, which was there again last night because Aaron Ramsdale started. David Raya wasn't eligible for this game because he's on loan from Brentford, so he wasn't there. There was an interesting quote from Mikel Arteta when he was asked about the quality of Ramsdale's reflexes and his quality overall. He said, "I don't think I'm the one to be asked about the quality of Aaron Ramsdale, because I was the one that brought him when everybody was questioning that decision." Which is absolutely true. But there's a sort of other side to that as well, isn't there? That if you say, I know fine well the qualities of Aaron Ramsdale because I brought him here, but I've also brought in another goalkeeper.
Yeah, exactly. The follow-up to that was, well, you also brought in David Raya, so what does that say about your view of Ramsdale? I saw Tim Stillman's tweets last night on this. I'm not sure if you've seen those, about sort of the discussion point within the fan base and sort of within the wider media. And I don't want to mangle Tim's point, but I think Tim's view was effectively that I think Arsenal fans have made their peace already with the fact that Raya is the number one, and that for it to sort of be a conversation point still from last night is kind of a sort of outdated already within a couple of weeks, which I understand completely what Tim's saying. And as Tim knows, I'm a big fan of most of his views, if not all of them. But on this one, I think on this one, given what Arteta has said, and obviously you guys have discussed it a lot on the podcast about the rotation and about picking players on merit, the fact that Ramsdale played so well last night, made that brilliant save. I thought his distribution was good. I thought everything about him was good, was top. Even sort of the interactions with the crowd and classic Ramsdale style. It was pure, sort of unfiltered Ramsdale.
We didn't see a lot of that on TV, actually, so maybe you could just expand on that a little bit, because obviously from the start of the second half, when he was behind in the goal where the Brentford fans were behind there, they were winding him up. You're just a shit David Raya. Every goal kick got the you're shit, all that kind of stuff. That fair game. That's the way it goes. But it struck me as slightly counterproductive. If I was a Brentford fan, I would be, because he thrives on that, right? That's not going to make him go, oh no, they don't like me or whatever. He's going to be like, right, I'll fucking show you guys. Yeah.
That's a pretty quick way to unlock the best of Aaron Ramsdale. But that's football, and they have fun. Yeah. And I'm sure they've all gone home last night and thought that was quite fun seeing Ramsdale interact with us. Like, I think he caught a late cross and sort of turned to them and laughed at them in much the same way he did against Spurs in the derby away last year. And when he made that save from, I don't know if you saw this on the replays, when he made that save from Visser, which he tipped onto the post, like a brilliant save, the ball was still in play. The ball was still in the penalty box, but he still sort of turned around and sort of smiled at the Brentford fans behind the goal. He found a split second to really rub their noses in it, despite the fact the game was literally going on just 10 yards in front of his face. But I thought he was great. And what's really interesting now is, based on the merit argument on his performance last night, he should keep his place in the team. But is that going to happen? If it doesn't happen, then that kind of undermines the merit argument, because he's not done anything wrong last night. And based purely on the 90 minutes he produced against Brentford, he deserves a shot against Bournemouth.
Yeah, as someone who, is in the media, who has to ask these questions of Mikel Arteta, who has to sit there in the press conferences and all the rest of it, can we go back to, was it post Everton when he'd made the decision to bring Raya in, right? Yeah. And like, sometimes Mikel Arteta is very frank and honest, and other times he plays his cards quite close to his chest, and he'll say one thing and you kind of go, yeah, I know what he's saying there. Or he's saying something publicly, for example, because this is not something that he wants to make into a talking point. But, when you do have a situation like this in your squad with two very good goalkeepers, that's going to be a discussion point on its own. On its own merits, that is going to be a discussion point. Similarly, if you had Gabriel Jesus and Ivan Toney, maybe you have a similar kind of discussion about that every week. And it's different, I know, because it's easier to rotate strikers. You can put one out wide, or you can play with two strikers at certain points in a game. You can't play with two goalkeepers and all the rest. But, I know what Tim's saying about what people or Arsenal fans will probably think about the goalkeeping pecking order right now. To me, it seems a little bit obvious. But isn't part of this down to what Mikel Arteta said and how he said it in his press conference when he's talking about substituting a goalkeeper? Why can't you have two goalkeepers? Why shouldn't you have two goalkeepers? That then not adds fuel to the fire, but that is what informs many of the questions, I guess, that are being asked of him. When Ramsdale is back in the team, when Raya is out, now what happens, etc., etc. Like, a lot of this is down to what Mikel Arteta said that day after Everton about what he views, or what he purportedly views the goalkeeping position to be these days.
Yeah, I completely agree. If he'd come out after Everton and said, look, we think David's the better option right now, he's the number one for now, but but Aaron's still fighting for his place every week, and every game's a new game, then I think people would have gone, oof, harsh on Ramsdale, but clearly they're seeing something behind the scenes that makes Raya better. The way he phrased it, and the sort of the unique nature of that approach, and the fact that no one's ever done that before in terms of rotating goalkeepers within the game, made that more of a talking point. And that, obviously, the extension of that is rotating goalkeepers game to game, which has happened more and is what Brighton do this season, for example. I completely agree. If he'd been more boring in his press conference, this would not be an issue. My fear as a journalist is that he will agree with that and decide next time I'll be more boring. I hope that's not the case, but it was very clear in the press conference after the Everton game, which would have been pre-PSV, I think. He simply did not want to engage on any questions on Raya and Ramsdale. It was almost as if he decided, I've said what I'm going to say on this, I'm not doing any more. To the extent that he was asked a very sort of innocent underarm question of how's Ramsdale responded to being dropped. And he said, I'm not going to talk about how every player responds to every decision. That was in journalistic terms, that was the easiest tap in ever. Just say he's doing well and working hard, which he did last night and previously in the previous press conference. So it was like he'd gone into that press conference and gone, I'm not going to make this any more of a bigger deal than I already have.
Yeah, I've said too much already.
Yeah, or I've said enough. That's it.
Yeah.
I've said enough. Move on. But hopefully he doesn't see the sort of the level of fallout and the level of discussion as something that will stop him talking that openly before. Because when he does open up and say things like that, it's great. Yeah. It helps podcasts, it helps newspapers, it helps TV channels. That's what fans want to know. It's what people want to know. But yeah, I mean, you alluded to it there in your question, but the key question is whether he really, really meant that. Or if he was sort of saying that as a way to almost protect Ramsdale in the moment. And that is why I think last night's performance by Ramsdale was so interesting, and why I think the debate is going to kick up again now after last night. Because if Arteta really did mean what he said, that it's based entirely on who performs the best and maybe based on the opponent and what the opposition want to do, then surely by that measure, Ramsdale should probably keep his place. I think Ramsdale was better last night than Raya was against Spurs.
I think that's fair.
Example. And these are the kind of conversations that we never really had before about goalkeepers. But this is what Arteta has started, and I'm glad he has, because it's really interesting. But the fact, as I say, and as you say, if we never had that press conference post Everton, we wouldn't be sitting here going, "Oh, with Ramsdale now, surely he comes back in," based on what's been said before. But because the dynamic has changed, the context has changed, I think everyone's sort of reading into it far more than we usually would. And yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised now if Ramsdale kept his place for Bournemouth. But equally, I wouldn't be surprised if Raya came in and Ramsdale's not seen again till West Ham in the League Cup.
Well, yeah, we'll see in due course, and obviously we're playing Bournemouth on Saturday. We'll talk about that a bit more in our Patreon podcast tomorrow. Just on the EFL Cup as a competition, it is West Ham in the next round. It's an away tie. How do you think Mikel Arteta views this, distinct from the way maybe fans think about this competition? Because, certainly last night when, you've got Declan Rice out, came off. Bukayo Saka took a knock. Thomas Partey's out. Jurriën Timber is out. Who else is missing? There's someone else I'm forgetting.
Martinelli,
Trossard, yeah, just two nobodies. Fabio Vieira not there last night as well, and you assume that's because of injury too, even though Arteta said he came off in the derby for tactical reasons. He got a few kicks in the first half, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was injured as well. Arsenal fans are like, well, just don't play anybody of any value because they might get injured and it will add to this injury crisis, and we've got bigger fish to fry and all the rest of it. Which I completely understand. There's a sort of track record of injuries at Arsenal that have been traumatic for us and have cost the team, not just under Mikel Arteta, but previous managers as well. But, Arteta came to Arsenal from Manchester City, a club who we know have got like a they've got a very deep squad in terms of quality. They don't necessarily have the deepest squad in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they have been able to marry the EFL Cup and the Premier League and the Champions League and sometimes the FA Cup as well. So what fans think about this competition and what Mikel Arteta thinks about this competition and its importance to maybe the culture that he is trying to instill at the club, where every game is important, every game matters, and every trophy is something to fight for. I mean, this might bear out in the next round and the rounds after that, where I think he does not view this as the same irrelevance as many fans might.
Yeah, I think if you had like a sliding scale of irrelevance, with each round that goes by, it becomes more important, and I think the team will become stronger and stronger. I think in last night's round, obviously Arsenal's first in the competition, the priority there was rotation and giving minutes to the players who needed it. And if that came at the expense of the result, I think Arsenal were okay with that. I expect that will probably be the same again for the next round. But if Arsenal keep on going, and if you hit semi-final, final time, you're not going to see Charles Sago Jr. No. It's going to shift. This is I think right now low priority, but this tournament can quickly become quite high priority. And I expect if Arsenal do get to semi-final or the final, that will be very much. Everyone will be talking about it, thinking about it. Obviously, Wembley will be packed out with red and white scarves, and it will be a huge trophy. I mean, let's not forget, Arteta really does consider the Community Shield to be a trophy. So if that is genuinely a trophy in his mind, which is fair play, I'm not, each to their own on that one. Then the League Cup absolutely will be. So I do think as it progresses, it will become a stronger and stronger team. But for last night, and especially without the Europa League this year, which was such a good place to play fringe players last season and the year before, or not the year before, 2 years before. Without the Europa League, they needed this kind of game to give them a chance to rotate and to give 82 minutes to Smith Rowe and Reiss Nelson. Otherwise, those guys just sitting there for months and months and months, and then someone gets injured, and then they come in cold and they struggle and get injured. Like, well, what do you expect? Speaking of injuries, just very finally, it is a little bit of a worry, going into a busy period. A couple of away games to come: Bournemouth on Saturday, then away in the Champions League. It's something all clubs have to deal with and all managers have to deal with. Again, maybe tying it into last night, if there are players who are going to be out for the weekend, the fact that some of these guys have come in and done well. For example, like my contention is that when he's fit, Gabriel Jesus should start as the centre forward. Yeah. The decision that Mikel Arteta made in the derby was to start Eddie and play Gabriel Jesus out wide, maybe because he wasn't convinced of what Reiss Nelson might give him. I don't know why. They gave him a contract, so they obviously know what he's all about and what he's capable of. But maybe a performance like Reiss Nelson, if you don't have Trossard, if you don't have Martinelli, the decision then to use Reiss Nelson in a Premier League game becomes a little more easy, and it helps facilitate the use of your best centre forward in that position, which I think, I don't think it's a coincidence that Arsenal's best attacking performance was against PSV when he was there. I think there were other factors, but I just think as much as Eddie has done good work and continues to work hard and all the rest of it, there's a sort of quality gap there that would make me inclined to try and offset some of what you might lose with a player in a wide position rather than take something away from centre forward. Yeah, my opinion, and it's not based on any information, it's just my opinion, is that Arteta, picked his best off-the-ball team for Spurs. I think he knew that Spurs would try and pass out, and he knew that intensive, aggressive pressing was going to be important. And that means if you want to play a team like that, that's Eddie and that's Jesus, who are two, I think, of the best sort of pressing forwards in the division. I mean, Pep Guardiola once said that Jesus is the best pressing forward in the world. So that's how I saw it. And actually, in the first half an hour of the derby, you could see that kind of playing out almost as if Arteta had, well, almost in the way that Arteta must have hoped, with the way that Arsenal were pressing and harrying and causing so much disruption to Spurs' build-up play. And I don't think Nelson has ever shown himself to be that kind of player in the same way as Eddie and Jesus. So that was my thinking behind Arteta's thinking, in my view. If that makes any sense. I mangled that sentence. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
That was my assessment of Arteta's team selection.
Sure.
And Bournemouth is interesting as well, because Bournemouth plays kind of man-to-man, expansive, lots of running, almost Bielsa-style play, which means it'll be a different challenge to just a low block, unless Bournemouth change to just do a low block, of course. But they haven't been doing that so far this season. So again, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if, again, they go for a team that's better equipped to win those duels and to battle sort of man for man across the pitch. But yeah, fundamentally, if Trossard and Martinelli are out and Nelson still can't get a start, you do wonder what's the point in giving him a new deal. But yeah, I think that Spurs game was kind of unique in its own circumstances. On the injuries, what I should say is we totally failed journalistically to ask the key question of Arteta last night. We were all talking about Ramsdale and Emile Smith Rowe, and he mentioned they had 7 players out, which only after the press conference did we do the maths and realise there are only 6 that we know about. So we're talking obviously Thursday morning, the morning after the night before, and I've very much not asked anyone who the injury might be. But if there are 7 out, we know of 6, which are Timber, Reiss, Partey, Saka, Martinelli and Trossard. And the 2 senior players who weren't on the bench last night were Fabio Vieira and William Saliba. Obviously, fans will be getting nervous at the thought that maybe Saliba's got an injury. If one of those is injured, which is what Arteta suggests with his number 7, you would presume, based on the team selection, that it's Vieira rather than Saliba. Because you would have thought someone like Charles Sago Jr. would only have played if Vieira was not available. And even having sort of Koji Dubry on the bench, you'd probably, based on that, assume it's Vieira. But right now we don't know, and we failed to ask, for which I apologise to all Arsenal fans who are desperate to know.
Well, we'll find out.
If it's Saliba, it's a problem, obviously.
Yeah, hopefully not. I hadn't even considered Saliba, so he put the shits up me on a Thursday morning, so I appreciate that. But look, you have a chance. You'll have a chance to ask him tomorrow morning when he meets the press ahead of the Bournemouth game. We better leave it there for now, though. Sam, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you very much indeed to Sam. You can find him on Twitter. He is at SamJDean, at SamJDean. So, as we mentioned right at the end of the conversation there, Mikel Arteta will meet the press on Friday morning ahead of our trip to Bournemouth on Saturday. Hopefully there's some good news in terms of injuries. He mentioned 7 players being back at London Colney. He didn't necessarily say that all 7 players were unavailable. Nevertheless, you can't help but worry a little bit when that many players require some treatment and have had to miss this game in midweek, albeit a game that maybe you can afford to do without a few of those players for. So we'll find out a bit more about that tomorrow. We'll cover the press conference for you on Arseblog News, and tomorrow afternoon over on Patreon you can hear myself and Lewis Ambrose look ahead to the Bournemouth game. We'll do our usual Premier League preview podcast. If you're not already a member, you get instant access to everything that we do on Patreon, from ad-free podcasts to the preview podcast for every Premier League game and Champions League game, the 30, our Premier League Roundup podcast, Poorly Drawn Month, Discord chat, and lots more besides. Patreon.com/Arseblog. So please do join us over there tomorrow afternoon for that. In the meantime, take it easy, folks, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. Yeah, just wondering if you saw the comments from Gary Neville during the week, and he basically said that you're showing too much passion and that you need to rein in those celebrations a little bit. Otherwise, you're never going to fulfill your potential. I mean, do you take that on board? Do you think that's something that you can develop as, things mature? I mean, things did get a bit raucous there at one point. Lots of, jumping around and screaming and all the rest. I mean, what do you think about all that?
I'm 5 and I got a new bike for my birthday. And Gary Neville's a little twat.